this area, maybe you have to be at a certain, be comfortable with the complexity that is involved in paradox. And in a paradoxical situation, you can very easily slip to one side or the other. The fact that the community can't do it all by itself means that you could really slip into acting on the community and trying to do everything for them. And on the other hand, by being so respectful of the community, you might withdraw so much that you really don't participate in any process that really has an impact. And it's that kind of thing that I'm not sure that people have named or wrestled with sufficiently in this area. So here's the story. Back in about 1997, 98, I was at the Canadian Institute for Conflict Resolution, and this woman came into my life, Vesna Dazovic-Markovic, from Bosnia. And she was this broken person, like it was just after the war. She had been a judge there, and when she went back after the fighting, they said, "You're a Croat, you have to favor the Croats as a judge." And she said, "I can't live this way." She came to Canada, took third-party neutral training, and I said, you know, you might want to do this in Bosnia. No way did she want to. But a year later, she phoned me and she said, "I'm ready now. I want to do third-party neutral training in Bosnia." Long and short, she did this. We trained trainers. She got engaged in changing legislation there. 700 Serbs, Croats, and Bosniaks have taken this training together. That all happened. But what she did is she introduced me to Vjeko Domlin, the economist who did the key study of the economy after the fighting. He was ambassador in Canada. We became friends. And he ended up recommending me, and I became a member of the Reconciliation Study Group of the European Center for Peace and Development. Bottom line is, I was invited to go to conferences in the Western Balkans on human security and reconciliation. So here I am, year after year going to Banja Luka, and it struck me as I was there. The people don't seem to be ready for all-out reconciliation. They don't want to go back and tell stories, or as Vjeko said, you want us to get over the 1990s, but he said, hell, we're not even over the Second World War yet. And so it occurred to me, maybe we could work on economic development based on reconciliation. So I tested the idea with people from the region, and it just happened that my friend Vesna was in Banja Luka right at the same time that I was there. Unrelated, but we met in the restaurant, in the hotel there. And so she floated the idea with her friends, and yeah, she said, this seems like a really good idea. To center on economic development, center on something that's positively centered and future-oriented. A couple of years later, I started developing the proposal, and I haven't got funding for it yet. But so a couple of years later, this Cree lawyer in Canada, I read my book, this one, From Violence to Blessing, and she said, this helps me to name the lateral violence that I'm experiencing. Can we talk? So we talked. She was using that for arguments, her legal challenges and everything. And at the end of our conversation, she said, could you adapt that process for Aboriginal people? So I said yes. I have to go over lots of details very fast. The long and short of it is that this Cree leader in Canada named Victor Buffalo invited us to try the process at Hobbema. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain the concept and some of the lessons that we've learned. And the idea is to run this in Aboriginal country, in Canada, and in Bosnia. And there's an openness to doing it in any other places that match the criteria. So, so after having tested this in Hobbema through three-day community dialogues, we learned a lot of lessons. And so this is basically what I just reported in Belgrade in October, lessons learned from Alberta and the European Center wants to now raise funds to try to implement this in Bosnia. So what we're looking at are the human development challenges in a post-conflict situation, or you can say post-colonial, as the Aboriginal case is, or post-authoritarian, post-communist, if you like. So we have misery systems, high participation in misery systems. It's really difficult to take action, to do anything. There is a departure from traditional values in both cases. I remember an Aboriginal elder, I met with him in a cafe. He was sitting across from me in Winnipeg, and he said, we as Aboriginal people have these great values of kindness and sharing and honesty, but we're not living them. Or I talked with Vesna, who said, we had great traditional values when it was Yugoslavia, but the values people are living on the street now are totally different. High level of addictions, lots of lateral violence. This is when oppressed people pull each other down. Nobody can get ahead. On Enoch Reserve, this Aboriginal guy bought an RV, turned it into a fast food, Aboriginal fast food thing with bannock burgers and this sort of thing. It was doing okay, and then people started talking. Who does he think he is? He's better than the rest of us. Next thing you know, it's burnt and there's graffiti on it. That's lateral violence. Lots of participation in the black markets and gray markets. In Bosnia right now, 38% of the economy is gray market, outside of the official economy. And lots of favoritism where organized crime kinds of groups will favor their own clan, or political units get organized according to kinship lines and favor their own. Aboriginal communities, the most powerful families, take control of chief and council. In Bosnia, you have huge cartels, Serbian cartel, a Croat cartel, and I had lunch with the Monsignor, who was a speechwriter for the Bishop of Sarajevo, and he was telling me, he says, if you're a Croat and you want to start a business in Sarajevo, you have to promise in advance that you're going to hire only Bosniaks, or there's similar kinds of things. So it's along the line of this, and you see similar things, similar patterns all over the place. The big challenge in Bosnia is that the political parties are all ethnic. So you have a Croat party, a Bosniak party, and so on. And my friend Jeko was active in trying to set up a multi-ethnic political party, and has its challenges. So here's the overall picture to what we're trying to do. We have interacting together, a community dialogue process, a framework, and an organization. And each of those is essential. And how and we've got to get it right for each of these. And if we do get it right, there's the potential that it could have quite an impact. I live in an open system. If I get any new ideas, I'm willing to change along the way. So it's not fixed. So if we think about the organization, we need a mandate to do something. So it's good to get what happened in Saddle Lake, Alberta, is kind of amazing. I went there in June to sort of consult with the community and Blue Quill's Aboriginal College, which is right beside there. So we wanted to just talk about this. In terms of the bigger context, this Catherine Twin has become Assistant Deputy Minister in the Alberta government for Aboriginal initiatives. So she has a mandate to do something, and she can pump resources into this, so that's kind of cool. So we went to Saddle Lake, and here 2 people came forward who believed in this. And they're like overall meta to this. But one of them, a man, was chief 30 years ago. He's a power behind the scenes. He knows everybody. He's not a threat. He's not out for political office. The other, a woman, just retired as a professor at Blue Quills College. So 2 Aboriginal people behind this. They get it. They understand it. So they're making certain that we get a mandate from the local government, so it doesn't feel like somebody is coming from the outside. This is their thing. They have to own it. And we'll hire a local coordinator, and Catherine's going to work at that. This person is paid by the government of Alberta, which makes it much nicer. And they form a representative organizing committee. And this is really key because given what we said about some people being left out, if anything's going to move ahead, it has to involve the whole community. And so you need to gather people together, a group of 24 to 48, that represent all the stakeholder groups and the different segments of society like youth and elders and entrepreneurs and local government, religious leaders, educators, and so on. The sponsoring body is the one we're framing this as participatory action research. And the sponsoring body then is looking out for the whole thing in terms of what can we learn, how can we guide this. So the local coordinator has certain responsibilities to the local government, but not beholden to the local government because there's also a line of responsibility to the sponsoring body, which if I get a $2 million shirt grant, which is a possibility, then I have resources and I can work with Brookville's College and so on to move that ahead. So initially, the framework was to say economic development is linked to reconciliation, to good relationships, and ethics. And you can say, why ethics? Well, in the early 90s, I made friends with these people who had just come from the Soviet Union. And they said, this is how things work in the Soviet system. You've got a tire company, and the inspector will declare 200 really good tires to be defective. They're carted off, they're sold on the black market, the inspector and everybody gets a cut of the action. So the economy is based on theft and deception. This is a gray economy kind of thing. And so you can say, what happens if you introduce a free market system if the basic values in the community are theft and deception? Everybody just doing anything it takes to get the most for them. You're going to have organized crime, which is exactly what happened in Russia and so many of these places. The economy started to resemble organized crime. And it made me think, we don't realize how many transactions here in North America are based on trust and honesty. Millions and millions of transactions are based on a handshake, on a phone call. And I mean, it just made me think. When I was at Maison de l'Amitié in Montreal, I was asked to pack milk into barrels to ship overseas. And so I called the barrel company, arranged for 100 barrels to be delivered to a warehouse, got an invoice. I did all that without ever seeing anybody from the barrel company. It was only a phone call, and the barrels were there. You know, like we have certain values that make our economy work that we're oblivious to.
Well, but there's Lehman's Brothers. I mean,
Yeah.
corruption and deception.
That's right.
In every country, and you have Lehman's Brothers.
Yeah, and you can say it can be skewed, and you can introduce that.
And I mean,
Exactly.
it's working exactly based on the perception that this is something is trustworthy. You can trust on it. You can bet on it.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just putting this up there as we've got to be concerned about ethics and values. Yes?
You should also factor in a reliable judicial system.
Yes. Okay. I'm glad you raised that because as soon as I started adapting this for Aboriginal people, I said, you can't do any of this without addressing spirituality because that's central to how Aboriginal people do it. So my framework expanded. And then as I started getting involved in Alberta, I heard about Manly Begay, and who's become a partner in this with me, who is co-director of the Harvard Center on Native Development, which has done a 20-year study on why and how reserves work. Because there's some reserves in the United States, or reservations as you call them here, are so good that surrounding communities are clamoring to say, can we be part of the reservation? There's one in, I think, Alabama, that is so prosperous economically, they have to hire lots of people from off the reservation to work in their plants. They happen to have the contracts. This is special for you guys here because they have the contract with McDonald's to produce all the little knives and forks and everything for McDonald's. So given your association with Kroc and all that, oh no, that's I'm in the wrong place. Yeah, that's the people down the road in Notre Dame. Notre Dame, yes. But anyway, it impinges on our field of conflict resolution. Anyway, Manley Begay has this five-point framework for healthy development. And one of the points is having a conflict resolution mechanism, because you can't have economic development unless there's a way in which people work things out if there happens to be a conflict.
Just for me to understand, Manley is creating these 5 out of the experiences of the successful reservations.
That's right. Yeah.
And this is a practice to theory.
Yeah. He's based in Tucson, Arizona, and it's gripping. I mean, he'll give a profile of 2 communities, one with a good location, lots of resources and everything. You'd think that's the one that's going to prosper. The other one, poor location, no resources and whatever. He says, which one of these do you think is doing well? And it turns out to be the one that has no resources, a terrible location and everything. It all has to do with claiming jurisdiction, having a strategic approach to this, having public-spirited leadership, a conflict resolution mechanism, and so on. Very, very effective in how he presents all of this. And the 3-day community dialogue process goes like this. We bring everybody together in a circle. We present an idea and a question, put them into small groups of 8, and they say, what does this have to do with us? So the question comes out of the framework. So the question could be, what values are important in your community? And what values are people acting on? And what kind of values do you think need to be there in order to have healthy economic development? And then that leads to other questions, like if there's a gap, then what could you start doing to address that particular thing? What's important, and what we did in Hovima, when we did this the first time, we had 24 people together, and they said, we don't want this to be a flash in the pan, we want this to continue, so we agreed every 3 months there would be another one of these. And I brought graduate students from Ottawa with me at the beginning, and they were there with their laptops, and there was one in each of the small groups recording what everybody said. They were so dedicated that as we took the bus to our hotel, or they took the van from Hovima, an hour's drive into Edmonton for the night, they started working together on their laptops to produce a report, and they worked into the night. Next morning they had a report for the whole group. This is what you said yesterday. You know, so there's that immediate feedback, capturing the ideas, valuing the ideas of people. So then there are reports back, and we circle back and ask another idea. They go into small groups, they keep working. So they build on one thing after the other. So, so as we do this, as we move through time, we start thinking about what kind of actions people want to take. And on the 3rd day, we put up a number of flip charts. They decide, oh, these are some good actions, and people put their names on. They sign up. We're going to start doing some things. And then 3 months later, they can report on how this all worked. Our first dialogue at Hovima had these 24 people. The next one had 48. And that was with Manley Begay. Just focused, the whole 3 days was just focused on good governance, and governance as it affects economic development, which is what they asked for. They loved Manley, and then the third one.
Manley is an American one. It's not
Yeah, he's
Canadian.
America. He's Navajo. And then the third one, they said, has to be about forgiveness and public-spirited leadership. And they organized that completely themselves. The overall facilitator came from the community, the facilitators of all the small groups came from the community, the scribes came from the community, and we had 105 signed up.
So 20, 40, 100.
Yeah, 24, 48, 105. So basically doubling each time. Now, the problem was that there was a certain amount of lateral violence that crept into the organizational structure. The organization, the four bands office, closed its doors. The woman that worked for the four bands office that had done a lot of the organizing had turned on Catherine Twin, and she was dismissed, and she was suing for wrongful dismissal. So all of a sudden, whatever was there that kept this process going. And to give you an example of how this negative mentality can come in, and the very first dialogue, they said, we really need to do something about addictions. They're running rampant, and there aren't enough treatment centers around. A good friend of Catherine's was a judge in Edmonton. He was there, and he said, as a judge, he said, there's no more capacity. If somebody commits a drug-related crime, we can't send them for treatment because there just isn't capacity. So there was a keen interest and a mandate for an action group to look at that with an internal group and an external group. So Catherine and a group of others were working on a plan for a treatment center. And some of the people started murmuring in a negative kind of way. Oh, that's her hobby horse. We don't really want that, and so on. And so it became the focus for some of these resentments and things. So from that, I really learned the lesson that we had not done everything we could have to have this local, inclusive advisory group, so that people would really have a say. We hadn't worked hard enough to get every group represented there. And we hadn't worked hard enough to have teachings within the organizational structure around being reflective and reflexive around how we're using this to address lateral violence, and we cannot at any cost allow lateral violence to take hold within our own organizational. So the way things stand at Pobima, there are some new chiefs elected, and here, to show you what we're up against, at one point we said, oh, we should be working with the chiefs. Well, at one point, one of the chiefs was under investigation for sexual violence and was in trouble, and another chief was a woman. They had just discovered a big warehouse. There was a break-in and entry, so the police came. They saw this warehouse filled with something like $10 million worth of cigarettes, owing $3 million of taxes that hadn't been paid, and they got, So this is where I say it's very hard for communities to move ahead when there's this level of problems within the community. So now it looks, there is some promise, there are some chiefs there that are really interested in it, and it could be that we get this back on the rails and move ahead. But in the meantime, we learned some lessons. Now, if we return to this matter of values in economic life, we can ask what values are necessary to achieve what we want, what's necessary for viable institutions, what are the best values we get from our traditions, and what are the lived values on the street. So those are questions. And to give you a feel for the difference, if you imagine launching an economic development initiative, think about how it would look different with these different constellations of values. In one context, it's most important to work hard, be honest, and follow directives. Think of what you could do if you had people with those values. Obedient, workforce, really honest, depend on them. Another context, it's most important to succeed at any cost and to support one's clan or kinship group, even if this involves dishonest practices. I was in Khartoum in 2003, And I remember them telling me that at that time, if you wanted to import anything, you had to have a certificate from the bank that you had the money in the bank to pay for your imports. So they said that the value of kinship is so strong that if you want to import something for $100,000 and you've got $20,000 in the bank, but your cousin works in the bank, your cousin will work it out that you get the certificate for the $100,000. You know, so that's what we're talking about. So economic life takes on a different shape with that value base. In the third context, it's most important to be generous and to contribute to the common good. Can't you see how economic life would work differently if that's what everybody wants to do? I remember when I was up in Thompson and this Aboriginal guy, we had a workshop, we had a weekend on the family, and he says, I'm going to share with you something that you couldn't buy for $1 million. He says, I'm going to share my life with you. He said, well, when I was a kid, my dad and I would go fishing. We'd have this whole bucket of fish, and my job as a kid, as soon as we got back to our community, was to take a fish and run to each household and share the fish. Context 4. It's most important to take independent action, to be creative and make things happen. Entrepreneurial, but it just gives you a feel for how constellations of values can shape what happens. As we think about reconciliation, one of the key things to address is trauma. And there are a lot of studies that are being done now on intergenerational trauma. And Catherine Twin, her challenge in Alberta is that 67% of kids in custody, that kids for adoption or kids removed from homes, are Aboriginal. But the Aboriginal population is like 6%. So it's like 10 or 11 times what it should be proportionately. And so as she's looking at what are the roots of this deep dysfunctionality, if you like, one of them is intergenerational trauma that's passed on. And so we have from social psychology this idea of reservoirs of recollection. We have the notion that in our brains, the limbic system, the emotional part of our brains, are not connected to the temporal lobe. So that means that if we have an emotional memory, there's not it feels as though it happened right now, like it's immediate. So our emotions don't distinguish that way. There are triggers that can invoke these reservoirs of recollection, and then when these triggers function involuntarily, we have trauma. And what happens is that we tend to maximize our own victimization because we know of all the harm that's done to us, and we tend to minimize our role in violence, and so there's a natural escalation. And so if we think about people wanting a sense of justice and reconciliation, the root metaphors of justice are balance, rightness, and fairness. But we're making constant comparisons. We all want justice. And so if we want to sort that out, it's a matter of what is right, what are the values on which we are making our judgments about what justice might be. What's the frame of reference? Are we talking about justice in relation to people? And if it's in relation to time, how far back do we go? I was acutely aware of this issue of time when I spent almost a month in Israel. And that opens a whole other world of discourse. I guess I can't go there right now. But how do we achieve balance? When we think about strict justice or retributive justice, if somebody harms us, we get the balance back by making the other person suffer. In restorative justice, we get balance by having the other person rectify the harm that was done, but we're still after balance. What about traditional teachings as a source of rightness? To what degree where do we get the teachings and the values that give us the sense of what is right in a given situation? And who determines fairness? So this is the framework for reconciliation that I've been working on over the years. At the heart of reconciliation are discursive and symbolic processes, and I get the symbolic part from Lisa Shirk, who just left, but she wrote a book on ritual and symbol and peace building. There are certain prerequisites like a safe space, a mandate, and so on. And these are the result areas. If there is really reconciliation, we have transcendence, we have healing, we have change of structures, we have new relationships, and a sense of justice. And meta requisites are those sorts of things that help the process as a whole. Each one of these things could take a long time. When it comes to the community process, we move from generating ideas, brainstorming, exploring broadly, to theming and prioritizing, establishing development needs. I mean, one of the things that happened in Obima was I said, what do you really want? What's your dream for an economy? And we just, we got 50 suggestions on flip charts all over, like lots of things that they really wanted. And to give you a sense of how there is potential and relationships destroy the potential. You drive from Edmonton to Obima, you see an old beat up kind of truck stop that is kind of makeshift, but it's working. And then you go by this beautiful truck stop, big facility, but it's all boarded up. And as you're driving, you're told, well, that big, nice truck stop is owned by Obima Reserves, but it's all boarded up because of lateral violence. They could have, there's an economic thing that could just be happening, but the relationships destroy it. So you think about all these things that they would have a vision for, and what stands in the way of that? So these are things that we try to explore. And then what actions need to happen. And when we generate ideas, some of this, every idea is welcome, so on. But when you think about economic development, you can question whether it's micro business, small business, medium business, at what level do they want to work. And when I'm in the Bosnian context, or former Yugoslav context, it's kind of interesting because there are people who have this imagination of how good things were in Yugoslavia. And one observation was, oh, we used to have our own oil company with our own refinery and our own outlets, and now all the gasoline is multinational. So there is the potential, there's the imagination, the know-how, and again, it's the fighting, it's the relational side that has kept that from happening. And then with regard to, I've got more here than we really need to get into, but in terms of strategy, we can think about import replacement, spin-offs, and downstream and upstream spin-offs, and strategic alliances, and so on. But at the end, we say, who else should be here? How do we extend the experience? Are there similar working group processes that should be developed to address particular challenges? And so on. So anyway, that's an overview of what's involved in this complex process of trying to explore with a community what does it take to change. And so I've been trying to walk that delicate path around that paradox that I first produced to you, or first presented to you.